I want to start with the cost of living crisis that only seems to be getting worse for Australians. The numbers just prove the point. Over the last year, the price of gas and electricity has gone up by 26.2%. Rents are up 11.5%. Grocery bills are up around 10%. The cost of insurance is up between 10 and 30%, and after 12 interest rate hikes, mortgage repayments for those on variable rates have effectively doubled. And given consumers are starting to cut back their spending and business insolvencies are up 17%, it's pretty clear Treasurer Jim Chalmers' cost of living measures aren't working. In fact, although his latest budget increased welfare payments, legislated higher wages for aged care workers and boosted childcare subsidies, well, according to the left, it still isn't enough. In a speech to welfare sector leaders and progressive activists last night, the Treasurer was forced to defend his $20 billion surplus from those, including the OECD, who think it should be spent on more handouts. What's that in other words? The activist class wants to use revenue generated by coal miners that they want to put out of a job to fund more government spending, which will, as any level-headed economist will tell you, worsen inflation in the long run. Now, joining me to discuss this and much more is the Australian's media writer, Sophie Elsworth. Sophie, welcome. The Treasurer is in a sticky position here, isn't he? Pressure to spend when really what's needed to rein in inflation is that harder reform.
Great to be here, Amanda. Yes, he's in a very sticky position, and I think there's a fine line to balance here. Now, just remembering we've had 12 rate rises in the last year or so, and inflation's still up around 5.5%, so well above that typical target around 2 and 3%. And, you know, I noticed just this week in Melbourne, petrol prices, they were $1.70. They're now up over $2. Households are really feeling the pinch here. Everything is going up and nothing seems to be coming down. So I think there's a lot of concern here that pumping, more payments and more subsidies and, more help for people will only push up inflation. As you said, any economist worth their worth will know their worth, would be familiar with that. And I think Australians are really worried, especially on the back of those comments by ANZ boss Shane Elliott today, saying more rate rises are likely to be coming. So this is unfortunately all doom and gloom for Australians who are really feeling the pinch, and there seems to be no end in sight anytime soon.
I'm sure it won't be long before Australians start to say it's time to do the cutting of red tape, the cutting of green tape, the investment in baseload energy, the sensible productivity reforms that are needed, even though they're harder, to get that inflation rate meaningfully under control. Sophie, to a different subject, former Chief Justice Robert French has warned Yes campaigners that sledging opponents and demonising no voters is a bad strategy. This comes after Indigenous Australians Minister Linda Burney said that the No campaign is importing Trump-style and post-truth politics. It also comes after the No campaign released footage of Thomas Mayo and Teela Reid, two of the chief architects of The Voice, saying that The Voice is the first step towards reparations and the abolition of Australia Day.
We could genuinely say to Australia, this is the First Nations, this is the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander position on what 26 January means to us and what we think the solution is.
It is about the reconciling of the balance. There does need to be reparations here. There does need to be compensation. There does need to be these tough, I think, decisions and reparations for what First Nations peoples have lost. That's undeniable.
Sophie, what do you make of the former Chief Justice's warning to, as I paraphrase, avoid calling no voters deplorables, to use another US reference?
Well, I think what he's saying has quite a bit of truth to it, because the Yes campaign have gone on the attack of the No camp, basically calling them racists and really going for them if they're not on the Yes side. And I think that's incredibly insulting to Australians. Just because you're on the No camp doesn't mean you're a racist person. And I think that has not worked for them. The polling shows that they are in trouble. And all this vision, Amanda, coming out from what Thomas Mayo and Teela Reid have said, you can't wind that back. They've said rent, reparations, they've gone on about treaty. That's out there now. They can't bring that back. They can't shy away from that. And especially on what we just talked about with cost of living concerns, I think it would really worry Australians to think there could be a potential that they could be paying compensation to Indigenous Australians, could be forced to pay rent, because that is out there in the domain now. So I think the Yes camp need a real reset, but don't forget they have huge funding behind them, an awful lot that hasn't been spent yet. So this whole debate is far from over, and I wouldn't be confident if I was in the No camp, because there's a long way to go.
I think you're right. They've barely, the Yes side, started to turn on the tap of cash yet. They're very well resourced, particularly from corporate Australia. Now to a story out of Western Australia, where the town of Albany is considering severing its ties with its Chinese sister city of Linyi. City of Albany councillor Thomas Bruff says the relationship should end because, quote, China has been engaged in economic warfare with Australia since 2020 and political warfare since the mid-2010s, close quote. He also said severing the relationship will help, quote, counter and defeat CCP influence and interference. Sophie, yesterday we learned that the Prime Minister is also considering delaying his trip to Beijing after its move to put bounties on pro-democracy Hong Kong protesters who are Australians in Australia. Are Chinese-Australian relationships on the rocks again?
Well, I thought, Amanda, that it had improved since the Labor government came into power, but there's definitely issues that have not been resolved, not forgetting those tariffs that we still have in place, and China today saying they need another month to determine whether they will remove tariffs off barley. This has also concerned wine growers, because they were hoping if they were removed off barley it would help their industry too. Not forgetting next week we have the verdict set to be handed down in relation to detained journalist Cheng Lei. She's been in prison for 3 years now with very little explanation, and it doesn't look like that case is going to be resolved anytime soon. So there are a lot of concerns here with Australia-Chinese relations, and it doesn't look like the Prime Minister is close to locking in a trip there yet. So I wouldn't be saying this relationship is mended in any way. It's got a very long way to go, in my view.
And just quickly before we go, it's been revealed that PwC Australia was involved in another matter involving the conflict of interest and misuse of government information back in 2018. So if your former PwC partners are already facing criminal investigations into their leaking of confidential government tax plans to clients, what's going to be next for the company?
Well, we also know, Amanda, that Ziggy Swiskowski is actually doing a review into PwC, and that's going to be handed down in September. I really think this PwC needs a whole new rebranding once this is over. This is far from over, but their obviously branding and their name is incredibly damaged, and I don't see how they can move forward with all the bad press and bad headlines that they've had.
It's hard to see, no doubt, a lot of anxious employees. Sophie Elsworth, thank you very much for your time.